Hello, and welcome to Behind the Music, where we take an inside look at the music you hear on North Carolina Symphony programs. I'm Michelle Di Russo, Assistant Conductor of the North Carolina Symphony. This Friday, the Symphony will perform a program comprised entirely of music by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, conducted by Evan Rochester. Our program will open with Mozart's Concerto No. 5 in A major for violin and orchestra with soloist Randall Gosby. During a concentrated period of composition within 8 months, Mozart had written 5 violin concertos at the age of 19, which he eventually played all of them throughout Europe in the 1780s. Although Mozart, the performer, was associated with the piano, he was also an accomplished violinist and had performed at the Salzburg court when he was only 7. In 1775, he was not only composing at a rapid pace, but was serving as part-time concertmaster and full-time section player for the Archbishop of Salzburg's orchestra. These concertos are early works for Mozart, who was still a teenager at the time of their composition, and only 45 years had gone by since Bach's double violin concerto. During that span, the Baroque era had transitioned through the innovations of the Galante style, marked by the return of simplicity, to the classical period. With this transition came an entirely new approach to the concerto form, especially with respect to the standard first movement of the concerto. Bach's ritornello would run obsolete and replaced with the famous sonata form, which was more stylized, but offered unprecedented dramatic possibilities and would eventually culminate with Beethoven's innovations. Mozart had perfected the crafting of the concerto opener with archetypal examples in his first 4 concertos. But by the 5th, Mozart was pushing on the expectations of the form, developing and innovating an approach that even in its standard form at the time would have been shocking. This concerto differs from the other 4 concertos in allowing the soloist to enter with a slow melody before introducing a totally new theme and settling in to present the 2 main ideas. When the allegro starts up, the violin introduces yet another new theme that includes a spiral descent that seems to accelerate into the fall. His development tones down the merriment in the minor mode before the recapitulation goes back into A major and provides a virtuosic summation. The second movement is contemplative, intimate, and thoughtful. Although the orchestra begins this section, the soloist quickly takes charge and the orchestral forces relax into the background. The form is fairly free, with 3 distinct entrances by the violin, each expanding on the introduction. The movement ends with a cadenza or an accompanied solo passage. Unusually, each movement of the work contains a cadenza. The cadenzas, written by 19th century violinist Joseph Joachim, have become standard in modern performances. This is the longest and most elaborate of the 3 movements. The last movement is technically a rondeau, moving gracefully in minuet style. The minuet music, introduced briefly by the soloist, will appear 3 times. The first episode is elegantly decorated, and the second episode fattens out a bit and has more dynamic coloration. Small pauses quickly delineate the rondeau sections. Another pause prefaces the surprise. It is the high-stepping Turkish march, popping in out of nowhere, turning the classical violinist suddenly into a folk fiddler. This is how this piece has earned the nickname of Turkish concerto. 4 of the 5 highly accented melodies in this section are based on Hungarian folk tunes, and the soloist remains the leader of the fun with firm orchestral responses. Cellos and basses are instructed to play con l'arco al rovescio, using the wooden part of the bow rather than the hair of the bow, providing a more percussive effect. At that time, music of the Turkish military establishment was very popular, so the surprise march was clearly a move from Mozart to please his audience. After the interruption, the soloist leads back to the main theme and approaches an enigmatic close. The closure represents statements and dynamic understatements of what had happened before, ending modestly with a rising, poised, and controlled melodic line from the soloist. We will then close our program with Mozart's masterpiece, Symphony No. 41 in C major, known as Jupiter Symphony. The nickname seems to have been given to it after Mozart's death, as the opening of the symphony reminded Johann Peter Salomon of Jupiter and his thunderbolts. Mozart's last symphonies stand as the summit of the symphonic repertoire, and curiously enough, they were all written in 9 weeks in 1788. Each is a very full-scale work, comprising the standard 4 movements of the late classical symphony. 12 movements in 9 weeks would mean that on average, Mozart spent 5 days and a few hours on the composition of each movement. That, of course, doesn't factor in that he was writing other pieces at the same time, teaching, tending to a sick wife, and enduring the death of his 6-month-old daughter. Meanwhile, his financial troubles had forced Mozart to borrow money from a fellow Freemason to keep his family afloat. In this symphony, number 41, Mozart shows his sheer brilliance as an orchestral composer. His emotional range is wide, prefiguring the vast, expressive canvas that would emerge in the symphonies of Beethoven. From the outset, the symphony provides a vivid example of the classical style. Unlike their Baroque predecessors, who generally maintain a single emotion throughout the movement, composers of the classical period commanded a large repertoire of musical rhetorical devices that could be juxtaposed within a given movement. The opening music takes on different characters, and near the exposition's end, Mozart injects the last of numerous themes that populate this movement, a light-hearted, skipping tune, self-borrowed from his concert aria, Un bacio di mano. The development arrives via an unembellished harmonic step from C to E flat. The orchestra at first carries over the same idea in its orchestration, but it quickly gives this up as the development launches into an imaginative harmonic exploration that includes expressive, impressive touches of counterpoint. The third movement, a minuet, is also a tribute to stylized dance forms with a minuet and trio. The trio section is actually pretty cheeky and plays a joke on the listeners. Mozart has the end of his phrases precede the beginning of it, basically having the opening notes of each phrase sound like a conclusion. This is a joke that Mozart had learned from Haydn when he used it in his quartet in D major, just 10 months before Mozart wrote this symphony. But the heart of the symphony is the finale. It is a marvel, even by Mozartian standards. Mozart combines 5 musical ideas in the finale, including the main 4-note theme, written in simple whole notes, 1 per measure. He displays supreme control of the counterpoint here, creating music that is accessible and enjoyable. This climax of breathtaking counterpoint in the coda can be seen as looking backwards to the contrapuntal virtuosity of Bach and Handel, and forward to the power of the fugue demonstrated in the compositions to come of Beethoven. Sir George Grove, the music scholar and founder of the Music Dictionary, suggested that Mozart marshaled all of his skills in writing this finale, as if he knew it was his last. Thank you for joining me in this discussion of the works of Mozart that you hear on this weekend's program. We hope to see you in the concert hall.